Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a document that's pretty overwhelming at first glance, a massive 300-page employment tribunal judgment from Scotland.
And this isn't just any case. We're talking about Peggy v. NHS Fife. It became this huge, high-profile legal battle over identity, privacy, and, basic workplace rights.
Exactly. And the conflict started with something that sounds simple, access to a female changing room. But it spiraled into so much more.
It really did. The key players are Nurse Sandy Peggy, who's the claimant, her employer NHS Fife, and Dr. Upton, a junior doctor and a trans woman.
Now, if you just read the headlines, you probably heard that Sandy Peggy won, a partial victory. And that simple story is exactly what we need to unpack today.
Because it's so much more complicated than that.
Our mission here is to get into the legal weeds, the nuances, and the really stunning contradictions in the findings. Because yes, Peggy won a claim against her employer, but that very same judgment paints a deeply unflattering picture of her own conduct.
It's a masterclass in complexity, and honestly, in administrative failure. The tribunal found NHS Fife harassed Peggy, but not for the reason you might think. It was all down to just profound management failures.
And at the same time,
At the very same time, the tribunal found that Peggy herself engaged in unlawful harassment against Dr. Upton. So you have a claimant who was harassed, who also was a harasser.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. How did this all kick off? It was the changing room.
Right. So Dr. Upton, the junior doctor, had transitioned. Several senior consultants knew, and she believed she had permission, she thought, from a Dr. Searle, to use the female changing room.
Which seems reasonable from her perspective, but that permission or policy, it wasn't communicated to everyone, was it?
Not at all. And that's the first failure. So by August 2023, things are already getting tense. A small group of staff, including Peggy, start having these private chats about their concerns.
And Dr. Upton is noticing this.
Oh, absolutely. She noticed people, waiting outside the door until she left. She recorded it as just rudeness, social exclusion.
And this is the point where NHS Fife could have stepped in. Months before the big blow-up, Peggy actually went to her manager, a Mrs. Davidson, back in August.
She did. But the manager was on holiday for most of September. No clear guidance was given, no HR referral, nothing concrete until late October. The tribunal was scathing about this.
They called it what? A failure by the first respondent?
Exactly. They said the lack of support for the claimant was a failure. A simple, timely response could have de-escalated everything.
But they didn't provide one. And so we arrive at the centerpiece of the case. Christmas Eve, 2023. This is where it all explodes.
This is a really charged moment. Dr. Upton is in the changing room just coming out of a toilet cubicle, and Peggy confronts her.
Directly.
She told her flat out, "You are not a woman, and you can't be in here." Dr. Upton felt cornered, humiliated. She was, very, very upset.
Okay, let's stop there and really unpack that confrontation, because this is where the judgment just turns its full attention on Peggy. The tribunal didn't just see this as rude, they saw it as unlawful harassment.
They were surgically precise about it. They said she used language she knew, or ought reasonably to have known, would be offensive. But the real killer, the thing that sealed the harassment finding, was her reference to the prisons incident.
That's the Isla Brayson case, right? The convicted rapist who was initially placed in a women's prison in Scotland. A huge national scandal.
Precisely. And by bringing that up in a direct confrontation with a colleague, the tribunal says she was making a very clear and ugly implication.
She was connecting her colleague to a sexual predator.
Yes. The judgment says Dr. Upton was to be expected to see that comment as an allegation that she was also some form of sexual predator. That's not just expressing a belief. That is a targeted, personal, and frankly, a vile accusation.
And that's what made it unlawful harassment under the Equality Act. The belief is protected, but using it to basically call your colleague a threat.
That is not protected. That's the line. And the tribunal went even further. They suggested this wasn't just a spontaneous outburst of emotion.
Oh, you mean the timing of it?
The timing, yes. The evidence shows she waited until 2 other staff members had left the room. She waited until Dr. Upton was alone, coming out of that cubicle, to start the confrontation.
Which implies it was calculated, targeted.
That's certainly how the tribunal saw it.
Yeah.
It suggested an intent to isolate and humiliate.
And this wasn't the only thing that damaged Peggy's credibility as a witness, was it? There was the issue with her supporters.
Right. It was a huge red flag for the tribunal. Initially, she claimed 4 staff members supported her. Later in the process, that number suddenly jumped to 13.
13,
including 4 men, which the tribunal found surprising, to say the least, given that men wouldn't be using the female changing room. It looked like she was trying to inflate her support base, and it just fell apart under scrutiny.
Wow. So to recap, the person who won a claim against her employer was also found to have calculatedly humiliated a colleague, implied she was a sexual predator, and then potentially inflated evidence to support her case.
And that's not all. They also accepted evidence that Peggy had called Dr. Upton a weirdo. When asked about it, she apparently suggested this was just a fair comment.
Fair comment?
Did not help her case. The conclusion is pretty inescapable. Her actions were found to be an impermissible, harassing manifestation of her belief.
So she's found to be a harasser, which sounds like a complete loss. But here's the twist. She still won. She walked away with a partial victory. How?
Because, to put it bluntly, her employer failed at every single administrative step. It is the definition of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory for NHS Fife.
Her win was purely procedural then. It had nothing to do with the tribunal agreeing with her on the changing room issue itself.
Nothing at all. It was all about how they mishandled her complaint after she made it.
Okay, so let's break down those 4 specific failures. What did NHS Fife do wrong that amounted to harassing Sandy Peggy?
Okay, so first was the interim permission failure. After she complained, the NHS did nothing to manage the situation temporarily. They just let Dr. Upton continue using the room for months, from September 2023 to April 2024, forcing them into contact. The tribunal said that long period without any interim solution was disproportionate.
So they just let the conflict fester for months on end.
They did. Second was the delay in investigation. It took them well over 4 months to properly investigate the Christmas Eve incident. That prolonged uncertainty caused Peggy significant detriment.
And the third one was about other allegations.
Yes, the unsubstantiated allegations. During the investigation, the employer brought up these vague patient care allegations against Peggy, which the tribunal found had little evidential base. It was another procedural foul that caused her harm.
So they were fighting messy, and finally, the discussion ban.
Right. Initially, they gave her this really broad instruction not to discuss her concerns with anyone. While they later clarified it, that initial blanket ban was found to be harassment because it unfairly limited her right to manifest her protected belief.
So the takeaway from her win is really just a lesson in basic management. Act quickly, investigate fairly, don't make stuff up. It's not a ruling that trans women can't use the changing room.
Not even close.
Yeah.
If anything, the judgment confirms that an employer is entitled, in principle, to allow trans staff to use facilities that align with their gender. Peggy's victory was a direct result of operational incompetence.
This gets us to the really tricky legal tightrope that employers have to walk now. And just to remind everyone, this is all happening in the context of the 4 Women Scotland ruling, which established that sex in the Equality Act generally means biological sex.
And given that legal constraint, the tribunal had to be very clear. They stated that allowing a trans woman who's biologically male under that FWS ruling to use a female changing room is not inherently unlawful in a workplace.
But it's not automatically lawful either.
Exactly. It's not an automatic right, but it's not an automatic ban. The employer's job is to use what's called a proportionality test, the Bank-Mellett test, to constantly balance the conflicting rights.
So you've got the trans employee's right to privacy and protection from discrimination on one side of the scale.
And on the other, you have the gender-critical employee's protection based on her sex and her qualified right to manifest her belief. It's an incredibly difficult balancing act.
And it got even more complex because the tribunal also confirmed something about Dr. Upton's own beliefs.
Oh, yes. And this is critical. They confirmed that Dr. Upton's own deeply held belief that her gender and sex are female is also a protected belief under the Equality Act.
So the employer is legally required to protect 2 mutually exclusive, totally contradictory belief systems in the same workplace.
Without letting either party harass the other, it's an almost impossible task.
So in the end, what was the solution? How did they resolve this to avoid future conflict?
The only thing the tribunal found acceptable long-term was just adjusting the work rotas.
So separating them.
Essentially, yes. They made sure the 2 employees wouldn't be on shift at the same time, so they wouldn't have to share the facility. It avoids the conflict, but it puts a huge operational burden on the employer.
So for you, the learner, trying to make sense of this, the message is clear. This judgment did not ban trans women from single-sex facilities.
Not at all. It's a roadmap of what not to do as a manager. The lesson is that process is everything. You have to respond, investigate, and actively balance everyone's rights.
And for any employee, the lesson is just as stark. You can hold a protected belief. But weaponizing it, comparing a colleague to a convicted rapist, that crosses a very bright line into unlawful harassment. Peggy may have won a technical victory, but the judgment on her personal conduct was absolutely damning.
It was, and it leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought. The legal system's solution here was to separate two employees because their legally protected beliefs couldn't coexist in the same space. So what responsibility does the average employee now have to manage that kind of friction themselves day to day without waiting for HR to step in and build a wall between them? Because at the end of the day, the law says your freedom of expression ends where another person's dignity begins.